So Unit 5 is the last unit in the core curriculum, and it's about the responsibilities of what we're calling the recorder. Now, in some scenarios, depending on where you are, there is sophisticated software that can be used to record things such as task completion, time on task, errors, things like that, for each end user that's participating in the activity. There's also times, though, when we're talking about lean UX of just-in-time working within an agile framework, that maybe we're not going to be using sophisticated equipment. It may just be a laptop and then someone recording task completion and other kinds of metrics through paper and pencil. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in this session. The first thing that I want to summarize, though, is that there's a couple different data points that we at Allegis are going to be collecting as we run these usability tests. The primary bread and butter thing that we record is task success. So a usability test is about asking end users to perform tasks in the system, and we record if they were able to complete them. And the benefit to that is that we may have built the feature, but we may not have built the feature in such a way that the end user can be successful and get it done efficiently, or perhaps they may not be happy about the way that they have to do the task. So task success is the one metric we collect. Did they complete it or not? And that's just a simple percentage. The second thing that we will often collect is what we call a usability rating. So that's a satisfaction measure. At the end of a usability test, oftentimes we're going through questions that we ask that are qualitative in nature but allow the end user to kind of quantify their feeling about what the experience was like. And the last thing that we tend to measure are the design principles that we've talked about in a different session, and that is if we identify and define what our design principles are and then ask people to rate how well this feature met that principle. While not scientific in nature, it does give us a barometer of how successful we were designing that feature. So, what are the responsibilities of the recorder? There's really two pieces because, as I mentioned, there's a quantitative and qualitative aspect. So the recorder should be documenting participant responses and actions during the course of the test. And what that means is that not only are we identifying did they complete it or not, we may be recording things like how many mistakes did they make, or what was their behavior, what were they doing when they tried to accomplish a task. We may also be documenting notable quotes from them as well. First, we want to make sure that we know who it is that we're testing, and we have that information. As a recorder, even though you're documenting stuff, you need to be familiar enough with the product, perhaps even doing a practice session ahead of time so you understand what's considered successfully completing the task and what is not. And as I mentioned earlier, notable quotes. So things either very positive or negative that can come out and we can tell to stakeholders so that they can understand what the experience is like. So let's talk about tasks and expectations. The kinds of things that we're going to be focusing on as a recorder is, number one, time to complete. Now, I've done this in a variety of ways where you're measuring, the exact seconds. How many seconds did it take to complete? And some people care about that duration. At other times, we've kind of done more guesstimates. Did it take a long time, a little bit of time? Was it instantaneous? So we can come up with that metric, but we want to understand, was it challenging for them? Even if they were able to accomplish the task, was it hard for them or not? And accuracy comes down to, did they complete it or not? And the overall success. Could they find information? Sometimes it's not about them actually doing a task as much as finding the things that they need to find. So we may ask them to answer something for us based on the information that's on the screen. And then sometimes we'll use questions to understand, before they've performed an action, what's their expectation? And when they're presented with a user interface, did that meet their expectation? So this is just a rule of thumb when we're recording, particularly if we're doing it in a manual fashion, that generally the way that we record task completion is in one of three groupings. Either the participant could complete it very easily, and that kind of means, okay, it was the first try, they didn't have any mistakes, maybe it happened quickly. We would kind of call that easy, and that would be pass, that they were able to accomplish the task. Medium could be that it just took a little bit longer, or that maybe they had a few errant clicks and didn't do it the right way, but then they were able to recover. And then hard would mean that maybe it seemed out of the norm. It took an incredibly long time, or there was a lot of errant clicks before they were able to be successful. But I also want to know what it means to not accomplish the task successfully. Certainly, if they just failed and did it incorrectly or gave up. But there's also this concept of they succeeded with assistance. So as I've mentioned, if a facilitator uses words that get the participant closer to completing their task. So in other words, they're not being neutral, they're doing something to help them be successful. That may mean saying something like, hey, take a look at the top right-hand corner. So that's an example where they're not telling them what to do, but they're kind of getting them closer by telling them where to focus their eyes. So that would be considered an assist, which means, nope, they didn't complete that on their own. Really, task success means, could they do it on their own without any interference or any assistance? The system usability scale is a standard usability metric that's used in software development. I'm not going to read through all these, but I think it's important that you're familiar with them. What we get out of it is a particular score, and that score can sometimes be hard to understand because we tend to think along the lines of academics. You know, that a 90 and above is an A, and an 80 and an 80 to 90 is a B, and so forth. Here, the rating that we're looking at is often more of something that has to do with a median. So if it's greater than a 50% score, then that's generally greater than average. However, it depends on what you're comparing this software product to. So that's something that we can discuss at a later time, but I just want you to be aware of that we do collect a metric that is kind of a self-report from the end user, kind of like a net promoter score, but a little bit more in detail for software. Now this is an example of kind of more of a low fidelity tool to record information in. This is an Excel spreadsheet that has macros built in, and you can notice that there's things such as a timer that could be used that tracks the number of seconds to complete a task. There's a drop down that allows the recorder to choose, did they complete the task, yes or no, and to what level of difficulty was it for them. And you can see there's an observations area for them to put that qualitative information in. And at the bottom of the screen, that's that system usability scale, or that satisfaction questionnaire that we talked about. Another metric that I tend to collect is what I call the desirability matrix. So at the end of a test, asking a participant to select 5 words from the following list that kind of represent the experience that they had. And again, this is a qualitative thing. But it's important to kind of understand what was the experience, how did it feel for these individuals. And oftentimes by having a number of people complete this, we can kind of get a sense as to did it swing as a negative experience or a positive experience. And here's an example of if you took the aggregate of a number of people, how something could look like. So in this case, we notice that perhaps organized is what people mention most often, and valuable and usable. So the goals of a usability test primarily are to understand, can people be successful performing tasks with the system, but it's also to get to some of these seemingly intangible qualities as well, to understand how well the features meet their expectations, how well these features delight our customers.